Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Great to have you with us. We've been studying in the book of Titus, but this is our Communion Sunday, and so I'm going to share a message that has to do with that. I think you'll find it very interesting. And it is a question I pose to people. Are you getting the message? The story is told about 25 men who wanted a telegraph job. And they were invited to come in and sit in a foyer room, and they were given the instructions that when they were invited into the office, they should go in and have their interview. And so they were sitting there, and there was all kinds of noises, including telegraph over the intercom and various noises going on. And after about 10-15 minutes, the men started to talk with one another. And one man began to brag that he can decipher faster than any man there. And he has won contests, and he is the best decipherer of Morse code. He can take it faster than anybody. And another one begins to talk, and he says that he has had 25 years of Morse code telegraph experience. Well, by this time, a number of these men feel rather deflated. And then one man said, I don't have hardly any experience, and I hardly know Morse code. But I did marry the station master's daughter, and I think that gives me a leg up on any of you. And as they were sitting there and wondering about things, a man jumps up, walks to the office door, turns the doorknob, goes in, and 5 minutes later he comes out and he says, I got hired, I got the job. And I said, well, wait a minute, that's not fair. We didn't get a chance to interview. And he said, you had plenty of chance. Morse code was inviting anybody who could decipher this over the intercom to come into the office. I finally caught on what was going on, and I went in and I got the job. And so I think sometimes God is sending the message to us, and we're just not listening. We're just not paying attention. And you're saying, well, oh, that's kind of far-fetched. How could that be? Well, let me give you some for instances of a whole nation that had every reason to believe in God, and they missed it. And I'm looking at 1 Corinthians 10, and he says here in verse 1, For I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, or ignorant, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized or immersed into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them God was not well pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness. Now he's talking about the children of Israel. And these people had been brought out of Egypt, and they had spoiled that nation, and none of them had lifted up a sword. The 10 plagues had brought that great nation down, and so much so that they were glad to see the Israelites leave. Here, take gold, just go. Take this gold goblet, take this silver plate, just go. Leave us. We don't want you here anymore. And so they left, and Then as they left, God led them down to be pinned up against the sea, and the Egyptians, who had a time to quit mourning then, said, "Oh, look at these stupid Israelites. They're so dumb, and we can go and enslave them again." And when they got down there with their chariots, God stopped them with a fiery pillar. He opened up the sea. The people walked across the Red Sea, and then as the fiery pillar was taken away, the chariots rolled down into that great big gap of dry land between the Red Sea, walls of water on both sides, and then as they were in there, the water destroyed them. So the water that saved the Israelites also destroyed the chariots and the Egyptian army. God had delivered them. So in that sense, they were immersed into Moses. He led them through there. They're following his lead, and then he was following God. And they saw the great deliverance. They saw the 10 plagues. They saw the things that happened in the Red Sea. And then they went a little bit farther, and they ran out of food. They had brought all that they could carry, and they ate it all up. And now they were in basically a dry desert land, no crops to harvest, and they needed food. And God gave them manna, and they ate that manna, and He gave them what they needed. They got to escape from their hunger. And then they got thirsty, and so God had a rock always in proximity to them. Indeed, it says here, the rock, the spiritual rock, followed them wherever they went and gave them the water that they needed. Now, this was a gushing rock, a rock that fed all of their sheep and cattle and all the families, enough to bathe in it, and they had everything that they needed. And so it even says here that the rock was Christ, and it pointed to God's delivering ability. And you think, well, they had the cloud by day, shade, and at nighttime they had a giant nightlight, a pillar of fire, and they had the food, the manna, and they even had the water, and they were delivered through the Red Sea. Every one of them had this same experience. And you think, oh, they must have a lot of faith. No, they didn't. You would think that they would be able to decipher all of these things and know that they should follow God. And when Moses was up on top of the mountain and he was getting the 10 Commandments, and he was gone somewhere in the neighborhood of a month to 40 days, and they began to get antsy, and they made for themselves an idol. And they bowed down to the idol, and they said, "This is what delivered us from the Egyptians." And they corrupted themselves. And therefore they didn't understand about God, and they worshiped idols. And then they finally got to the point where they're going to go into the promised land. And they sent 12 spies in. They all came back and said it was a great land. But 10 of them said, well, there's giants in the land. And there were, and walled cities and chariots and people that had bronze and steel swords, and they didn't think they could take them. And yet they just had, by God's grace, defeated one of the most powerful nations in the world. God did it with grasshoppers and frogs and hail and fire and darkness, and He just brought them down, and He destroyed the army in a flood of water, and they couldn't trust God enough to go into the promised land, even though 2 said, "We can do this. Just look at God. He's on our side." and they decided that they shouldn't do that. They were so against Moses, and they wanted to stone him for what they had done. And so, my friends, God got so that he didn't appreciate them. It says here, I wanted to read this one particular statement. Okay. So they wanted to even stone Moses, and God said, "Get away from these people. I'm going to destroy them all, and I'm going to start over with you." And Moses pleads for them, and so God says, "Okay, I won't destroy them right now." And then God said, so the Lord said, "I have pardoned them according to your word. But indeed, as I live, all the earth will be filled with the glory of the Lord. Surely all the men who have seen my glory and my signs which I performed in Egypt, which they should have believed, and in the wilderness, yet have put me to the test these 10 times, and have not listened to my voice, shall by no means see the land which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who spurned me see it, but my servant Caleb." And so, my friends, there was this rejection, widespread. And it even gets worse than that, my friends. If we look here at 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 6, "Now these things happened as examples for us, so that we would not crave evil things as they also craved. Do not be idolaters as some of them were, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and stood up to play." That was when Moses had the 10 Commandments. He was coming down from Mount Sinai, and these people were worshiping the golden calf. Verse 8, "Nor let us act immorally as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in one day." Baal of Peor, they had idolatrous worship that included temple prostitutes, and all these men were going over there and laying with these temple prostitutes and worshiping that god in so doing, because these were temple prostitutes. And men are very, very stupid when it comes to things like that. I remember a young man that had been attending the church I pastor, and he wanted to become a pastor also. And he said that one of the turning points in his life is when he went to a party, and a girl who had dedicated herself to Satan said, "I'll sleep with you if you give your heart and life to Satan." And he knew he shouldn't be there and turned away from that and walked away. And he made his way over to Christ and got saved. But men can be so very stupid. And there was a lot of this type of worship where there was temple prostitutes and licentiousness. And if you slept with these prostitutes, you in fact were worshiping the God that they serve. And 23,000 of them fell. Now you'd think the people in Israel would be wise to this. They'd already been eating the manna every day. They'd been drinking from the rock. They saw what happened to Egypt. They saw what happened in so many ways, and yet they were still not getting it and not loving God like they should. And then it says here, "Nor let them act immorally as some of them did." 23,000 fell. "Nor let us try the Lord as some of them did and were destroyed by serpents." They had to go around Edom. Edom wouldn't let them go through the land, which was kind of like a shortcut. And so they had to go around, and they started complaining. And because of their complaining, God sent fiery serpents among them. And these people then started to say, "Oh, Moses, pray that the serpents will be taken away." And Moses went to God, and God said, "No, the serpents will stay. But I'm going to give them a way to escape. If they get bitten by these fiery serpents, which is certain death, they go to the middle of the encampment, and there on a brass pole has been fashioned a bronze serpent, a serpent of judgment, and they just look at that and believe that God will save them from that serpent and fiery judgment of the fiery serpent. They will be saved. They will not die physically from the snake bite." And later on, Jesus said to Nicodemus, "Are you a leader of Israel and do not understand these things? You must be born again. As the serpent was lifted up in the wilderness, so too must the Son of Man be lifted up on the cross, and those who look on him and believe that he's the remedy to their problem, which is sin, shall be saved." And it doesn't make sense except that it's faith in what God has provided. Now, no matter how silly it might seem to some people, and people are saved by faith. And so this is being said here, and so they grumbled, and 23,000 died of Baal of Peor, and they grumbled, and many died because of the serpent bites, but there was a way to get around it. And these things happened to them as an example, and they were written for our instruction, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. There were people that said, "Well, you Levites, and you think that you're the end all of things, Aaron and Moses, but we're Levites too, and we think we should have some say in worship in the temple and stuff." And so they brought to themselves 250 men that put fire in their fire pans. Everybody had one. And they brought them there to the temple, and God sent fire out and consumed all of them. And then there was some that held back, the leaders, Korah and some others. And God opened the earth and swallowed them up alive and closed the earth like that never existed. And then after that, the people were grumbling at Moses, and a plague broke out upon them, and Aaron got fire from the altar and went and stood in the midst of them, and the plague stopped just where he was and didn't go any farther. And so thousands and thousands and thousands of people, mass amounts of people, died because of their unbelief. And yet they should have perceived, and they should have understood. They had the manna. They had the water from the rock. They went through the Red Sea. They saw what happened to people who disobeyed. They grumbled against the leaders of Israel. Over and over and over, they missed the point. And so Paul says here in verse 12, "Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed that he does not fall." They didn't get it. The whole nation, hundreds of thousands of them, missed the boat. They had one example after another. But oh, friends, we're smarter than them, aren't we? We see what we go through with the bread and the cup, and we participate in the communion service, and we understand what that's all about, and we wouldn't get into fornication. Oh, no. And we wouldn't desert God and get into idolatry. Oh, no. We're smarter than that. Think again. Think again. I took communion for years and didn't understand. I could have told you the body, the bread was the representative of Christ's body. I could have told you that the juice was the representative of the blood of Christ. I took communion as a young man, but I wasn't saved. I somehow or another didn't get it. I didn't give my heart. I didn't surrender myself to the Lord. And so I know that people can go through communion and not really understand the import of it and make a personal relationship with God paramount in their life. And it says here in verse 13, no temptation, or you might say no test, has overcome you or overtaken you, but such as is common to man. And God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. You're thirsty? Here's the water from the rock, Israelites. You're hungry? Here's the manna from the sky. And, oh, you're bitten by the fiery serpent? Go look and live. But with the temptation, will provide the way of escape also, so that you will be able to endure it. Then Paul writes to the Corinthians and makes an application. And he tries to help them understand about communion and about false communion with idolatrous gods. And he says in verse 14, therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak as to wise men. You judge what I say. Is not the cup of blessing which we bless a sharing in the blood of Christ? The answer is yes. When we participate in drinking the cup, that is a sharing in some sense or another, and an assent that we believe in the blood of Christ. And sharing in the bread is the breaking the bread is a sharing in the body of Christ. Since verse 17, there is one bread, we who are many are one body, for we all partake of the one bread. So it's not only that you're joining to Christ, but you're joining to one another. Look at the nation Israel. Are not those who eat the sacrifices sharers in the altar? They would take one large steer, and they would give a sacrifice of part of that animal on the altar, and then the rest of the animal they would eat. And as they would eat that animal, all participating, that was their way of saying that they are participating in the sharing of this, the rest of this animal, and this communion with God. Remember when Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were swearing off the eating of the meat and drinking of the wine that Babylon was supplying to them? The reason why they were swearing those things off is because a portion of the meat was offered to an idol, and a portion of the wine was sacrificed to an idol. And then as you ate that meal, you were participating in idolatrous worship of that particular god. And so they said, can we eat vegetables and drink just water? Because they were swearing off being involved with this idolatrous worship. It says here in verse 19, what do I mean then? That a thing sacrificed to idols is anything? Or that an idol is anything? No, but I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. So they sacrifice to some idol that they made, and they eat food that they themselves raised, perhaps. But what we have to understand is that behind those idols, there's a demon, and so we can't be involved with that. And they sacrifice to demons and not to God. I do not want you to become sharers in demons. Don't have anything to do with them. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. They're mutually exclusive. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. So don't eat these sacrifices that are made to the idols. Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? We are not stronger than He, are we? And so he was trying to help the people understand the importance and the significance of the sharing of the communion table and the damaging influence that there was in eating things sacrificed to idols, and it wasn't just nothing that you can pass off. And he used the example of people in the Old Testament who had every reason to believe in God and yet were not getting the message. And he is pointing out, take heed lest yourself fall, because you participate in the communion and you're supposed to understand what it means. But frankly, there are many, many Christians, I think, today that don't really get it and aren't really properly related to the Lord, and they have the commonality of the bread and the cup and the communion meal, and yet they're really not getting it. It's not sinking in. So when the next time you take communion and you're participating in this, really think through, do you really understand what you're doing? Do you really understand how you are related to Christ and what He's done for you on the cross? And do you really believe it? My friends, take heed and properly understand the importance of this wonderful thing pointing us to the Lord Jesus Christ, and believe.